Hello, hello, hello. Welcome on in. Today we start with Atemi again. We haven't listened to music here for some time when we were starting, but that's Atemi Oyungu Destiny. Welcome on in. Today we are talking about beliefs again. So we talk often about how to restructure our beliefs. And today we are talking about religion. Dang, 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 dang. I know that's a heavy topic. And what I'll do here is give you my own example, how rethinking religion, rethinking my beliefs came out. Because it's not something that I was set out to do. I was minding my own business, living my best life, and then there was a pandemic. So what happened to me is that during the pandemic, I was brought up Catholic. Good Catholic girl, Sunday, church every Sunday, singing in the choir. That's been my background. Then, when the pandemic came, suddenly we couldn't go to church. That wasn't the problem. The problem was we were told that now it was okay to watch church on TV. Chineke. Can I tell you? I mean, for me, it was so mind-boggling. Why? Because throughout my life, when I'd been growing up, we'd been told that those people who watch church on TV are the heathens. They shall not inherit the kingdom of God. It is wrong. It is wrong to watch church on TV. It is only for... No, it wasn't even, I think, for the sick. I think even the sick were meant... In fact, the priests would go around and visit the homes of the sick to provide, sacrament and to provide mass for them. So church on TV, it's not to be done. Then, during the pandemic, I actually remember when I sat down and I watched... it wasn't the Pope. It was the... I don't know what they're called now. The Pope's assistant in Italy. And he was going around with the sacrament, so exposing the sacrament through the empty streets, and it struck me. And this is in Italy. It wasn't in Rome, I don't think. It was in Italy, because Italy is the one that was really ravaged by initially at the start. It's the one that was initially ravaged by the pandemic. So this was to give some solace to the believers who were there, and I was dumbfounded, because then. First of all, in my neighborhood, that wasn't happening. And then I had questions. I just had so many questions. And my first question is, who's making the rules? How is it that for 40 years of my life, it has been that one must go to church, and then suddenly, because of, a silly little pandemic, now it is okay to watch church? Honestly, that shook me. And it's good actually to have these things that shake you, because what it did for me is that it made me go back to my beliefs. I started questioning if it is possible for that one to be changed in almost the blink of an eye. What are the other rules that I follow that are changeable? What is this that I have never questioned that apparently should be questioned? Because apparently there's someone who has a call, who has a phone and can either call God, because that's what we were taught. I was taught that God has taught that you must go to church on Sunday. In fact, within the Catholic faith, is it a cardinal sin? It's one of those sins. Not going for mass is really, really bad. So, how have we... So are sins constructs? Honestly, this really took me for a loop. Are sins real? What of all the things that I've been told are real, and what of them are convenient and can be changed depending on the situation? Given the pandemic was a super different kind of situation, and it's not that I blame the church for providing an alternative. I mean, that was absolutely needed. The people needed this. The masses needed this too. It was a super hectic time. But I'm a stickler for rules. So if the rule says this, I'm fine. But then if you're going to change the rule, who is it who's changing the rule? Is it the Pope? Is it God? Is it a conclave of people? So that actually made me go back to start thinking. It made me start thinking about the history of the church. And it reminded me that the church was more or less born in Nisreen. We have the Nisreen Creed in Catholicism. And it was a group of men hold on to that point, it comes back. It was a group of men who sat round together, sat maybe in a room, I don't know where they sat, and then they looked at all the texts there were, and then decided this is good, this is bad, this is good, this is bad, and created a library that became the Bible. And then it was there decided that this is the creed, this is what we believe. Christ is God, and this is how we shall be Christians. This is our faith, and this is what we follow. And when I thought about it now, I mean, there were a lot of things at play. There was a lot of things at play. First of all, I was telling myself that, hold on, if this rule, assuming, I don't even think it was, but assuming this rule of going to church every Sunday came from that congregation of men, what other of the rules that congregation of men had come up with are changeable? Yeah? And of course, I am at heart a feminist. I have always been a feminist. And people hear the word feminism and for whatever reason go in all manner of directions. Feminism is not down with men. Feminism is up with women. But more from the construct that patriarchy has diminished women. So not up with women to make them superior to men, but so that we can have some form of equity. So that we don't have 50% of the population living under rules which are oppressive to them. That is what feminism is all about. So with that in mind, then I went back to think about this group of men who sat around and decided that this is what we shall believe. And luckily or unluckily, sometimes I just think that things fall into place for their own reasons. I'd had a friend who'd been telling me about the Bible in a year. There was a Catholic priest who was leading a reading of the Bible the Bible in a year. It was just that. And that was during the pandemic, which was super good. And she was doing it. So, I decided, let me do it as well. It's not bad to figure out, to know more about the Bible. Again, because I'd been, all my life, I've been very close to the Bible. And this didn't seem bad. I mean, this seemed actually very good. To go back into the Bible and just to figure out the teachings and get a feeling of relief and peace and all that kind of stuff. That's not what happened. Let me tell you, when we started in the Old Testament, I was thinking the First Testament, no. In the Old Testament, I was asking myself, oh my God, here I've just said that I understand the Bible so well, and you don't even know what the Testaments are called. So no, I don't understand the Bible that well. It's just that I've been reading it for quite some time. So in church, by myself, that kind of thing. But no. So we started in the Old Testament, and I listened. I listened keenly, but I also listened with a view to understanding women. How are women portrayed? Where are the women? What's going on from the female perspective? As you can imagine, I was disappointed. Women were either not mentioned at all, and the only time they were mentioned, it was in not such great light. I mean, I didn't go that far into it. I didn't even get to Lot's wife looking back. No, I didn't even get to whose children are those, who's that? Now this should, again, Catholics, we remember parts of the Bible without necessarily pinpointing them. Now clearly I can't even pinpoint the people. But I didn't even get to this guy who offers his daughters to be raped by the masses so that the angels who have been sent by God are not assaulted by them. And I'm like... And I didn't get to that. What I did get to, because I listened. The first thing that really dawned on me is all the books are by men. And I started asking myself, and I mean, I'd have conversations with people. Do you mean to tell me that God could not find a woman to inspire? Because that's what you're told, that the books of the Bible are written through inspiration from God. So even though it's written by a man, it's not necessarily the man himself. It is the man channeling the word of God. And I mean, I had many questions, because now the more I look into the Bible, I mean, I do it on and off now. And it looks like some of these books, like the Old Testament. I was reading, I'll put it in the notes. It's a book by a woman who is talking about the woman's Bible or something like that. I forget exactly what it's called, but I'll put it in the notes. And I don't know if it's her or someone else who mentions that the story of the Old Testament, the story of creation in Genesis, there seems to be two totally different stories in chapter 1 and chapter 2. So in one of them, the difference between man and woman plays out dramatically differently between the two. Yeah, it's in the second story that we're talking about Eve being created from a rib. And in the first story, I think God... No, I should have read this before I came here. Either way, go read. That's your homework. Go read Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 and just see what differences there are there. And it made me start thinking, because again, I've been reading a lot of books, and I was reading also Gadolana and the creation of patriarchy. And something she says very interestingly that quite struck with me was that part of the creation of patriarchy, because patriarchy, what is patriarchy? Patriarchy is a system that elevates men over women. So really just that creates this line of men as having some superiority. And a lot of us are taught that that is natural. That is the natural order of things. And that's why over such a long period of time, it's been difficult to espouse, to propose equity just. No, not so much equality, but even equity amongst the genders. Because again, the concept of male and female is something that is created. Simone de Beauvoir, I'm reading her as well, and she says, I wish I could quote her properly, but she says something along the lines that you could be born female, but the woman is created. This creation means that this is what society puts into our heads, and this is for both men and women. Patriarchy is not necessarily good for men, because that is what tells men that they cannot delve into the emotions that the society has considered female. And this decision of what is female to be what is weaker, to be what is not just weaker, but feeling, touchy feeling. In Kenya, people would like to say uko na umama, which means that's Swahili for uko na umama. You're womanly. Kenyans, tell me how to translate that properly. The direct translation is you have a lot of woman in you. Yeah, you have a lot of woman in you. That's a direct translation. But the meaning is that you're behaving very much like a woman. And that is a very common statement that I have even said myself, thinking about that guy, Akona Umama. He has a lot of woman in him. And these are the things that just brainwash us to some extent, because we've been taught to expect men to be strong and they do not cry and they do this, they do that. So when you find yourself as a man who doesn't fit into that construct, then it's like you're being taught that you're not a man, you're not a real man. I was watching a documentary yesterday, a Swedish documentary, and it was really interesting. It was called The Price Men Pay. Because my Swedish is not that up to par, I didn't understand it all. But it was super, super interesting because it's a take on something that feminists have been looking at, but now from the other perspective. Because feminists have also looked at this. Feminists have always been saying that patriarchy is not good for society. And I want to get away from the term feminist because I know a lot of you just get turned the wrong way by that term. But if you take it as just that, if you take it as this, I call it a movement to bring again, to take away these shoulds. We have a lot of shoulds. To take away the shoulds from the male and female perspective and let people be themselves. Don't tie this one down with an anchor because she was born female and then say that she can and cannot do this. Don't do the same with a male and tell him that he can and cannot do this. So in the documentary, they were talking about how men get really lost, especially young boys, in trying to figure their path of masculinity, because what they have for teaching is the internet and YouTube and social media. And from that, they can get a lot of teachings which are not that useful. And it's really unfortunate that we see these incidents of, I don't know if I call it hypermasculinity. I don't think that's the right word for it. It's an incident of, especially younger men, especially in that age, probably, let me just put it that way, because that's the age I'm talking about is young adults. So young adults, 20 down, so trying so hard to strive and figure out where they fit in life, and then getting into these groups of young people who are also just like them, trying to figure themselves out, and then sticking to a teacher. And depending on what that teacher is teaching them, they could go, they could go, their path could go astray. In that, if all they're taught is that women must be beaten, women are below them, women are terrible, then they don't get such positive encounters with women, because women don't want to engage with that. When that's the teaching that they get, it takes them down a certain path in life, which is not necessarily them, because then that is moving them away from the person who they would essentially have wanted to be. And that's why I find it very interesting with gayness, because gayness is to some extent having a knowledge about yourself that society doesn't allow you to bring out. I was once talking to my gay friend, and he was trying to show me how complicated it is, because all people doubt themselves. All people get drawn away from their own path at some point, when we are there being told what you should and can and shouldn't, and that's natural. That's just society trying to tell us what we should do. Is it the superego? These things that tell us do this, do that, don't do that, and that is how we are drawn into a path within society. And again, not bad, because then we are not then these little selfish beings that are going around terrorizing the world and thinking that the world is about us. No, we need to learn how to live within society. But then you were saying that when you have all these things that are at play, that are telling you what you should be, and yet there's something fundamentally inside you that is pushing you in a different direction, and you know that everybody shall reject you when you say this, everyone from your family to your church. I remember the guy in Queer Eye, the guy who, what does he do? He builds and puts the furniture together. I don't remember their name, but I remember watching an episode where he was so sad because they were doing this in a church. They were, I don't know, I think the guy was a pastor, the guy who they were helping. And he hadn't been to church since he was really like a child, very, very well. He was in his teenage years, I think. And I think he'd been excommunicated because he lived in a community that did not think of gayism as anything that can be talked about, as in it was dirty, it was terrible, it was off. And I believe even his own family more or less kicked him out. And so this friend of mine was telling me that that's a reality that that a lot of gay people face. So now to get back, what was I talking about? I've really taken a tangent there. I was talking about women in the Bible. So now, again, I was talking about my path with Christianity and religion post-pandemic. So when I saw how women's voices were not there, I was unhappy. And then I realized that this is not the work of God. No, this is the work of men. It is men who sat around and decided we shall put this book and we shall not put this other. So that made me go look for the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. And I found it, and I read a book called Revealing Mary Magdalene, because I find the Gospel of Mary Magdalene really difficult to understand. It's not complete, and it's because it's not complete, it's broken up. It's not fully, it's not one long text that you can read from end to end. And do I call it a little artistic? It's not like the other Gospels. It's different from that perspective. It doesn't just tell a story. It tells imagery and that kind of thing. So Revealing Mary Magdalene is a book I read, and I'll put the author in the comments. And it gave me a different perspective of Christ and of the church. And I liked that, because these are the things when you're reconsidering your beliefs. It's like when you're doing anything, when you're taking a scientific approach to any kind of situation, it's good to have different information. And so for me, once I realized that this information had basically been cut off from me, because it's no secret that the church in Rome, I believe, has a number, well, it has a number of books from ancient times that are not part of the Bible, that haven't been released. I think they release some every so often. And once we all have this idea that this bound and translated book that I have in front of me is what God has said, then I don't really question it beyond that. So within this deep dive that I've been doing, a lot of what has been spoken about as well is the translation of the Bible, in that these books that were written by men have also been translated by other men. And so they say they were like elements of the time that were at play, both at the point of writing the initial books and at the point of making the translation, such as a word that would have meant one thing has been translated into something that means something different based on what the agenda of the time was, unfortunately. And the example that comes to mind, but I don't remember it completely fully, was, and this I got from Philippa Gregory in her book Normal Women. I love that book. It's a book about it's a book that poses the question, what were women doing when in the past when history was being written? Because history again is just about men. So she goes down to the records and she digs deep and she just finds information about women. So I believe she's the one who talks about how in translation of this notion that the woman is weaker, feeble, is something that now I can't even remember if it's in the Bible. But either way, if it is you who knows the Bible, tell us. Tell us where it's written that, and maybe it's not even written there, but it's something that then comes out in how the preaching is done. Because that's something else that she mentioned, that sometimes there would be like a communique that would go out on how things are going to be taught and the message that is going to be sent across. But either way, she mentioned how sometimes it's just a word, that something that meant something in one in the original text is then translated in a way that's not quite the same in the translated Bible. So now I've started questioning the rules. I've started questioning the gendered aspects of religion. And then now I got to, excuse me, I got to this critique on how religion reached Africa, and thinking about colonialism and the brutality of the introduction of religion. Because I'd visited Senegal and then just listening to these stories of the fact that there's a church. I didn't visit it. I felt it was a little too much. But the idea that on top was a church and under it was the passageway for slaves into the ships that were taking them across the Atlantic, that really struck me. That really struck me, how religion was used to subdue people. Because remember, it wasn't really so clear cut. It wasn't that you had this group of people who were happily minding their own business in Africa. I don't like the term Africa generalized like that. Let me then narrow it down to Kenya. It's not that you had this group of people in Kenya who were just happy to find these white people who had now come and were ready to just sit and be taught new things. These people had their own structures and had their own cultures and had their own things to do. In fact, I'm reading Facing Mount Kenya by Jomo Kenyatta. And he describes this to some extent, how it was a structure that was so imposed that it became impossible for a person to live without conforming to what the colonialists wanted, such that going to school and being taught the oh, my throat is being tickled. There we go. Going to school and being taught religion, because then going to church, because they were missionary schools. These were schools that were brought up by Christians to spread the gospel and provide education to this backward African who doesn't know what they're doing. But the backward African was fine. The African society was great. So I remember reading Yuval Hirai, and he mentioned that there's no point debating what could and should and perhaps might have happened in his book, Sapiens. Because he says when you start going back and saying what should and could and might have happened, first of all, you can't go back, and therefore it just doesn't matter. It's one of these things that you're resisting, but for no particular reason. There's no saying whether you'd be better or worse off. More likely, according to me, according to I think a lot of us, we'd be better off, but there are probably practices that we're happier are not there anymore. And there we go. Because I learned, I was surprised to learn that there was still patriarchy within traditional African society. I was hoping that it had come with the West, that these colonialists had brought it in, but alas, alas, it was already there. And that's my study. I'm very curious about the origins of patriarchy. Yeah, because Gerda mentions it to be very much based on well, she doesn't say that this is the point. No one really knows where it completely came from, but she says that Christianity absolutely helps it, or religion, not just Christianity. Religion absolutely helps it with this idea that God created man, and then from man, Eve was created, and there is this hierarchy about, because that's what it really just says in Genesis. But anyway, in Kenyan traditional society, in Kikuyu, in fact, let me narrow it down, because he speaks about the Kikuyu, which is a tribe in Kenya. In Kikuyu traditional society, yes, there was a division of labor. It wasn't as crazy, I'd put it, as what we have now, but there was a distinct division that this is for women and this is for men. And I love the story that he says, which is actually a story I remember hearing when I was young, a story of a time when women ruled the world. And they became too much, is the point. They became big-headed, and they were insufferable. And the men decided to lay a plan to take over dominion over women. And what they did is that they quietly agreed to impregnate all the women. And when the women were at their weakest, I think they beat them, something along those lines. They beat them into submission. And after that, the men took over. The Kikuyu creation of patriarchy. Anyway, where was I? I was talking about, yes, the violent means through which Christianity was introduced into the continent. And it's not something that I had much thought about, because I was brought up Christian. That's just all I knew. That's just the proper and right thing to do. But when you think about it that way, I started asking myself, but then what did we have before? And then you start seeing how the traditional, do I call them the real aspects from an African traditional perspective have been somewhat merged into Christianity and Catholicism. And there are some which just didn't find place. Like when we get married in Kenya anyway, you have two ceremonies. You have the church ceremony and the traditional one, and both are equally marriage. In fact, it's possible to get married with the traditional one without actually having the Christian one, because this is then the uniting of these two systems which are not completely linked, because some things needed to be kept. Some things had to go, but some things needed to be kept. And I like talking to a friend of mine who's from Latin America, and she tells me that depending on where you go, there are such different things that have been married in to Catholicism, because it's it. You could try and beat everything away from them, but there are things that the people would keep and must keep. And based on that, then even though you've put in all the structures in place, because what happened was the creation of this government and this tax system and this identification system that just curtailed the human being, and the person was unable to do anything unless they're fitting themselves into that system, which then meant that they had to give up their traditional ways of doing things, because their ways, I don't like the word traditional, because those are their ways of doing things, and align into this new path that was completely foreign and did not work. And to the large extent, I think it still does not work. I think that a lot of the problems we have in terms of greed and, well, I guess that's a universal problem, but I feel that if there had been a more internal means of moving from traditional to modern society, something that had been a movement from the people, things would have worked better across the board. But again, we go to Yuval, who tells us to stop crying over spilled milk. Things are the way they are now. So now back to my path. When this is the journey that has been taken. So when I started putting all these things together, and then I read one of my favorite books. It was a documentary and then a book, Exterminate All Brutes. I forget the name of the author, but that was quite illuminating, because that talks about this process of belittling people and calling them brutes and thinking of people as not people, which is what has enabled like the massacres that happened in Australia and America of the indigenous people. It's insane that it's possible to just look at people as not people. Oh, and of course, the reason that Australia and America's indigenous is so much more prevalent in my mind, and in I guess everyone's mind than what happened in Africa, is that those people were almost wiped out. It's almost wiped out, as in genocide, killing masses of people to exterminate them, exterminate all the brutes. There we are. So the joy, I guess, in the African continent is that the settlers did not find it all inhabitable, which then was great. Then, the scale was not the full extermination of the people, but the numbers that were involved, the killings in Congo with King Leopold of Belgium. I mean, it's just that we don't have the figures, we don't know the numbers, but it's really, really mind-boggling to think about how there can be so much hatred and so much damage done in the name of profit, I guess. And unfortunately, what I found is that religion was what was used like the balm. Yeah, so we cut you, and then we put the balm to soothe the pain, such that religion is then what was used to do that. And we see that not only in those places, we see that in Europe as well. I mean, there's been so much that's the Spanish Inquisition, the witch hunts. I mean, there's been so much that's been done to push religion forward and agenda, which makes me now understand that a lot of this is not from God. It's not godly. Because I spent a long, long time asking God, why did you let this happen? And it gets back to free will, that this is not, that the people who were doing it, well, I can't speak for them. I don't know why they did what they did. But that God is eternal, God is love. So these were not loving things that were happening. So even though they were said to be in the name of God, they were not. So that enabled me to keep contact with God, while then telling myself that religion is not it, for me anyway. These notions that keep being pushed down have some kind of agenda. There is an agenda behind them, and I need to be able to step back and pick what works and reject what doesn't. I need to be able to connect to myself and to my own being, because there is divinity within me. I have a direct connection to God. And from that, I can have this conversation and ask God, and ask myself and ask God, what here works for me? What do I believe? Then I don't end up in situations where things are happening and I am condoning in the name of God. And within this journey of mine, one of the big paths I took was down a path looking at cults. I was almost obsessed. I was very interested in cults. because I think this I tied to my experience in relationships, because I asked myself, if it's possible for me to get into a toxic relationship, is it possible for me to get into a cult? Because for me, I felt that that was the worst thing that could possibly happen to a human being. Think of the Jonestown massacre. People giving the poison to their children and then themselves to die, because that had been what had been said by the leader. And I don't say this in judgment. I say this because I understand a little more after having gone down through this path. It's a path of understanding what happens to a human being to make them get so far away from themselves that they feel that this is an act that is reasonable and makes sense. Because that's really the thing with cults, and that's sometimes the thing with toxicity, toxic relationships. So I was super, super curious. And part of it is silencing the mental capacity of the people within the cult. Part of it is using language, using words that brings the people together. Part of it is just making them not think by making them tired. Part of it is, there's a lot of ways, there's a lot of means that these cults do the things that they do. So then I needed to ensure for myself that anything that I am engaging in is something that makes sense for me. Yeah, and I'm not saying that religions are cults, but there are religions that are cults. So that's the whole point. That's how people end up in them. And how do you then find out whether the space that you are in is a dangerous space? How do you see yourself slipping? It's like there's a friend of mine, I really like this statement that she made. She says that being in an abusive situation, because that's what a cult is, being in an abusive situation is like being that frog that has been put in the water. Then the temperature keeps being added, and the frog, I guess because it's cold-blooded, doesn't move because it can adapt its temperature. It can adapt its body temperature to the temperature of the water until it starts boiling and the frog dies, until it's too late. Yeah. So having this capacity to feel into your intuition and listen when it is screaming, get out, to be able to do that. Yes. So this is my story in terms of how I have questioned belief within religion. And I have found it super useful for myself, because then I feel now that I am more at ease with my own beliefs, because I feel that my beliefs have been questioned. I have gone down and looked at what is this, what is this, what is that. I have come out differently, super differently. For me, this was a super difficult thing to do, because the church was again part of my identity. Once I had identified myself there, then it became difficult to look into it through this new lens and question the things that I have been told you're not allowed to question. But then I chose the God in me. I chose the voice of God in me. What God was telling me was proper and right. And I pray for that for you as well. I pray that you're able to look in and query, question, weigh, and then from that perspective, be able to see what works and doesn't. I like to think of, really, there are sometimes extremist views that we can have in the church. And there's something that is called a thought terminating, is it that cliche? So something that people just say that then you can't say anything beyond that. It's something like what the Bible says, go forth and fill the earth, which is the reason people are going to procreate. Or just these things, these little snippets that are taken out of context from the Bible that are used to make certain statements. And sometimes we find ourselves imprisoned by them because it's just there. You can't really fight it. And then the person goes off smugly feeling that they've said something right. But if you feel it within yourself that this is something that is wrong, please don't be bullied. Don't be bullied by your faith. I put faith in quotation marks, because the set of beliefs that you have are not necessarily in congruence. They're not necessarily you don't necessarily, your values don't necessarily go with them. And it's always important that when you have that kind of fight, internal fight, you must choose yourself. You must choose you. And you must have the conversation with God. Challenge it. Go around and, don't become a prisoner within yourself because you no longer fit into the space that you have always fit in. Allow yourself to expand, allow yourself to grow, and allow yourself to see things from a fresh perspective, which is what I did, and this is what I wish for you. As always, I appreciate your time. Thank you for joining me. I really love these sessions, yeah? Please put your comments and let us know, how have you been dealing with these issues? Do you have any questions about belief, religion, church, anything like that you have never really known what to do with? Let's have this conversation. Let's bring it out into the open, because these things that we hide, I felt that I was very much alone when I was going through my little struggle. But I'm sure, especially like in the part of the world where I live, there's a huge percentage of the population who are atheists, meaning it was all rejected, lock something and barrel. It was all rejected, but then, which is fine. I'm not judging anybody. I think everyone has their freedom to believe what they believe. But then take that. Let's just have a more enabling path. Let us be free. Let us not be in chains by the very thing that is meant to free us. Bye-bye.